What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's blog on theboys.com. We hope all is well wherever you are. We hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and that you're excited because the Dallas Cowboys are playing this week. The Dallas Cowboys are playing on Saturday night, to be specific, December 30th, so not New Year's Eve. Thank you very much, Dallas Cowboys, and thank you very much, NFL. The Cowboys will be hosting the Detroit Lions. This is a matchup of two playoff teams. It is the night that Jimmy Johnson's going into the Ring of Honor. As mentioned, it is an island game. It's prime time. It's the only game on, obviously. So there's a lot of fun energy, I think, surrounding this. If you have followed me before, you know that I like to talk about, moments when I was in high school or younger, and kind of when my love for the Cowboys reached a point where, I had no idea that I would be able to do this for a living. But I think those memories are ones that we hold on to as sports fans, as human beings in general. And these Saturday games are pretty rare. They don't come around a lot, and the Cowboys have played in a couple of them over the years, but I always think back to the 2009, late season Saturday night game when the Cowboys went to New Orleans, went to the Superdome, and beat the then undefeated New Orleans Saints. And so when it's on a Saturday night like this, and again, in between, all of the holiday season, it has the potential and the power to potentially be a really amazing memory for all of us. And I hope that it is for you, again, in the middle of what I hope is a wonderful weekend. But that being said, it will not be easy. The Lions are NFC North winners and are currently in control of their destiny for the 2 seed in the NFC. If they win out, that 2 seed is theirs because we all presume that San Francisco is going to take care of business and get the 1 seed. If the Lions slip up and lose a game, then control belongs to the Philadelphia Eagles. But if the Eagles lose a game, the Cowboys obviously are not only in control of their destiny with regards to the NFC East, presuming that Dallas wins on Saturday night, but Dallas would then be in position to control their destiny also for the 2 seed. So there are a lot of balls still in the air as it relates to the NFC playoff picture, which means the final 2 weeks of the regular season are going to be a whole hell of a lot of fun. As it relates to this game, though, Cowboys against the Lions, the Jimmy Johnson night, it's going to be so much fun. As mentioned, I wanted to bring in the very best, and so I went to Jeremy Reisman, my very good friend, my coworker from SB Nation. He is the me at SB Nation for our Detroit Lions site, Pride of Detroit. Jeremy was kind enough to sit down with me early on Wednesday morning, just so you're aware, in case whatever news comes out, I like to always give you all the information that I can. We sat down on Wednesday morning to talk about this game from kind of a 30,000-foot perspective, kind of get a 101 on the Lions, because while we all know a lot about the Lions and they've been this really fun story really ever since the Dan Campbell era began, they've had quite a run throughout this season. They've had highs and they've had lows, and I think their fan base is obviously feeling some type of way having won their division for the first time in 30 years. But who are they as it relates to how they play football, obviously, and who should we be afraid of? Who should we be weary of? Who should we be on the lookout for? I asked Jeremy all these questions, and I think you are going to enjoy the conversation. So we're going to get to it right now. Jeremy's on Twitter at Detroit Online if you would like to follow him. I do mention it in the conversation, but I wanted to mention something else that I do mention in the conversation, and that is if you like what we do around here at our YouTube channel, you owe Pride of Detroit a big thanks. If you like, a lot of you do, our Madden simulations, I mentioned this in the conversation, we completely stole that from Pride of Detroit. They were the first people to start doing that. And so if you like what we do, please consider following them. They're great people. They produce great content. I know it's obviously about the Detroit Lions, but they raise money for charity with their shows. They are just such a fun group of people to obviously work with and be around and monitor and see things. So check them out, prideofdetroit.com, Pride of Detroit on Twitter, at Detroit Online on Twitter is how you can follow Jeremy. But without further ado, here he is from SB Nation's Pride of Detroit. It is Jeremy Reisman. Very pleased not to be joined by the one and only, the legendary, the supremely talented, also supremely handsome, my former co-host once upon a time on Monday, Football Monday. You know him and you love him from SB Nation's Pride of Detroit, the main man over there. It is Jeremy Reisman. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to venture across enemy lines this week.
No problem at all. Thanks for buttering me up, because I feel like you might be trying to take me down a peg or two in the next 20 minutes or so.
I always, I don't hate the Lions. As you know, I was really annoyed at how much everybody else loved the Lions.
Yeah.
So I'm happy for you and like Chris and all the pod people, obviously, and all Lions fans. Like, it's a really cool story. But I always consider them this like runt of a team because they have the same color scheme as the Cowboys. Like, it's like, get your own thing. Like, why you got to be silver and blue? Like, I put the Panthers in there just a little bit too. I know it's a different shade of blue, but it's just do your own thing.
Well, it's good to know it's coming from a place of insecurity.
My other non-important question is, what are your thoughts on the Pistons?
Oh boy.
Because we're talking after they set the record. We're talking on Wednesday
Yeah.
morning, so congratulations to the other team in Motown.
Yeah, thankfully I'm not too much of a basketball fan, but I hurt for Detroit fans. They've been through a lot with all of the major sports. I think I saw someone out there saying like the Detroit holds the worst records of every league over the past 20 years. In football and hockey and baseball and now in basketball.
Well, you are a Wolverine as well, so
True.
we'll see if they can, kind of keep the overall football vibes positive here,
Sure.
because that's where they are. The Detroit Lions are winners of the NFC North. I imagine that hasn't gotten old in any stretch over the last 3 days at this point, 4 days. I don't even know anymore. This is actually a really cool and fun thing to see, like all the Lions fans who are just like lining up for the division championship gear because like you've never had it, like you know what I mean. You're
Yeah.
like that's got to be pretty sweet. Do you consider the roar restored, which is also a thing that I hate to say?
I don't love that saying either, and I'm not
Okay,
even
good.
a
Okay.
huge fan of the hashtag one pride thing that is our slogan or whatever you want to call it. But no, I mean it's obviously really, really cool. First time in 30 years. Um, most I mean, I feel like at least half of my fans were not even alive when that first happened. And people are rushing to get shirts, people are rushing to get playoff tickets. Ford Field has never hosted a Lions playoff game. They have hosted obviously a playoff game. It was a Super Bowl, but this is the first time the Lions are going to have a home playoff game in the Ford Field era, which is something I think everyone is looking forward to. Just kind of even if you're not in the building, just kind of experiencing what Lions fandom ramped up to 11 like that is going to be like in the modern era. So it's a pretty cool time to be a Lions fan.
No, seriously, very much agreed. That was a bit of a fraudulent Super Bowl. We don't have to talk about how it went. But it's very, very exciting, and I do think it's cool how the Lions have actually done it. I do feel like every now and then we have this team that we kind of want to effectively crown, and we want to say like,
Yep.
oh, everyone's in on a team X. Like the Browns were kind of that, like prior to the Baker Mayfield era, everybody wanted to get in
Mm-hmm.
early. The Jaguars, obviously, way before the Trevor Lawrence era, everybody just trying to will them into existence, kind of around the Blake Bortles time. The Lions really did it, and they're one of the more dangerous teams in the NFL. But some people, Jeremy, even some Cowboys fans, and I say this not disrespectfully, but just it's what I see. Some fans
Yeah.
do not put them in the hierarchy of San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Dallas. Do you feel that's fair? Is that bothersome to Lions fans? Like, what are your overall thoughts on the Lions and where they stand in the NFC playoff picture? Because they control their destiny for the 2 seed. Like, no one's giving them
Yeah.
their due props at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I understand like the hesitancy. One, I think they haven't been there a long time, right?
Mhm.
The Eagles have been good for a few years. The 49ers have been good for a few years. The Cowboys have been good for a few years. The Lions are new to it, and I think there's still an amount of skepticism that is both warranted and just kind of comes with the territory of being a new contender in the conference. That said, I also think there's a little bit of legitimacy to some of the criticism. Right, this team is not very good against the pass, and that's to me that's what's going to be their eventual downfall. Whether that happens in the opening round, whether it happens in the conference championship, Super Bowl, whatever. But this like I'm a huge fan of DVOA. DVOA is kind of one of my favorite stats out there. You look at the Lions and you look at each one of their units. They're a top 10 passing offense. They're a top 10 rushing offense. They're a top 10 run defense, and then they're like 16th in pass defense. So they are in. I mean, and that's not even that bad, right? They're the problem is that they're kind of trending in the wrong direction there when it comes to pass defense. I think Lions fans are kind of crossing their fingers and hoping the return of CJ Gardner-Johnson either this week or next week is going to help. I think they're hoping that James Houston returning from IR, which might happen in the next 2 weeks or so, maybe in time for the first playoff game, that's going to help for what has been a largely anemic pass rush outside of Aiden Hutchinson. I think those are reasons to be optimistic, but in general, I think there's a little bit too many holes on the defensive roster for them to be a true Super Bowl caliber team. That doesn't mean they can't make a run, though. I think I'm a true believer in just getting into the tournament and seeing what happens. And if you have an explosive offense, fourth in scoring, I believe that can carry you. Sometimes that's the other thing too, is that the Lions have proven they can win in a lot of different ways. They've won a couple games 20-6. Their defense has shown up at times. They've won shootouts. Last week against Minnesota was a shootout. San Diego was, or Los Angeles was a shootout. So they can win in multiple ways, which makes them dangerous on a week-to-week basis. But they are a team with a glaring flaw that I think some of these top NFC contenders can take advantage of, including the Cowboys.
So I agree with you. They do kind of have the smell and the feel of, going to lose a playoff game 41-39, and just Jared
Right.
Goff's going to have this like all-time, performance that just wasn't enough at the very end. Perhaps this is a bit of a litmus test in that sense with Dak. And obviously, the Cowboys haven't played well the last 2 weeks, but he is playing like one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. So it will certainly be interesting. I know, there's a lot of thought behind the idea that he could bounce back and have success, but we also thought that about the Dolphins, and then their pass rush just kind of woke up and took over the game. What would you say is the Cowboys, as have been given all this grief because they can't win on the road, and before it was they couldn't beat a team above 500. What is the signature win of the Lions season so far this year? And I don't mean that rudely, but
Yeah, no.
I think the take was floating around that, well, they lost to Seattle, they lost to Baltimore, and lost, soundly to Baltimore. So it was like they couldn't,
Sure.
kind of, obviously the Kansas City win was big, but it was so
Right.
long ago that it was like 5 years ago. So like, what is the one?
I mean, I almost feel like it's Denver, and I know that doesn't look great in the aftermath of what happened to Denver after that. But the Lions had hit this rough patch where they had lost to the Bears, they had lost to the Packers. It seemed like all these calls for the Lions being frauds were out there and loud and maybe had some legitimacy to them. And then they take on a red hot Denver team who had won 6 of 7. Their defense was stellar over that time, and they'd taken down the Bills. I think the Chiefs were in there as well as teams that they had taken down, and the Lions absolutely blew the doors off them, including hanging 40 points on a defense that hadn't given up that much really since the Dolphins game way back in week 2 or 3
Right.
or whatever that was. And so it felt very much like a Lions, at least offense, getting their mojo back, and I think they proved it again the following week, last week, against a Vikings defense that was really good. They hung 30 on them. So to me, that especially if the Lions kind of continue back in this upward trajectory, I think that's going to be maybe their most signature win, in that they pulled themselves out of a funk. Every team has had one of these funks, right? We all know the Eagles
Right.
had that. The 49ers had the 3-game losing streak. The Eagles have looked bad. The Cowboys are currently on a 2-game losing streak. And I think that's kind of defined who Detroit has been in the past. They haven't lost back-to-back games in over a year. And so being able to pull themselves out of the funk and then pull out 2 pretty important games to win the division, that Denver game is really what I think sparked it.
Yeah, maybe we changed the terminology from signature win to like catalytic win, because I could totally
Yeah.
see what you're saying. Like that's like the spark that they needed. The Cowboys had not lost 2 games in over 2 years since they just did to Miami. So if you're a fan of How I Met Your Mother, maybe there's like a blitz effect that happens where they do it to Detroit. Well, I obviously can't do it to Detroit because Detroit, whatever. You get my point. I
Yeah.
asked you before this conversation, I gave you a few things that I wanted to ask you, but I mean, I think we both knew that I wouldn't hit all of them. But something I'm interested to see was, I asked you the thing you're most confident will go right on Saturday night from a Lions perspective. Like, you have to bet the house on one thing. And what is it?
In a positive, like in a negative fashion, I think the Cowboys
I
are going
told
to
you
put
could do
300
whatever
passing yards.
you can do that any
Yeah.
way you want. It could be like a negative thing. It could be like, oh, I think Dak is just going to be on fire. But it could be whatever you want.
Yeah. I'm gonna do one of each, one for each side of the
Ooh.
fan base here. I think Dak's gonna throw for over 300 yards. I think that's a horrible matchup for the Lions, to be honest. Their secondary, particularly their outside corners, have really struggled. And Nick Mullins could put up 400 yards against this Lions defense. I can only imagine what Dak can do, and I imagine he's probably gonna throw fewer than 4 interceptions like Mullins did. So I think that's a very, like, take the over on any Dak, prop bets this week, I would
Right.
imagine. But I would also say, like, the key to the Lions' victory, I mean, they're very much going to, I think, follow in the footsteps of what the Bills did and just try to run the ball like crazy. It's what they do best, and it's probably what the Cowboys do worse. So that seems like a pretty favorable matchup in the Lions' favor. So, like, over maybe 120 rushing yards for the Lions this week seems like a pretty safe bet to me.
Yeah, I am definitely afraid of the Lions running game. The Dolphins didn't exactly have a ton of success there, but it was kind of a weird game where they didn't totally need it.
Right.
So yeah, James Cook, I don't know if you know this. He had 221 total yards from scrimmage against the Cowboys.
Yeah.
Nobody had 220 against him in a single game since Calvin Johnson in the game. in 2013.
Ah,
So I thought that would make you smile. Yeah, when I looked that up, I was kind of depressed, like because that game lives in like infamy for
right.
Cowboys fans. But like the Bills game didn't feel that bad. Again, maybe it was just that they had clinched a playoff spot. I don't know what, but I think those are both fair. I think Goff could have success as well. Like I
Mm,
do think this Cowboys defense is a little bit overrated. It's not the right word, but I do think that their reputation carries them a little bit more, and they're like the
yeah,
star power of who they are,
sure.
as opposed to what they're doing as of late. So they're not really getting after the quarterback right now. I mean, I would feel confident, and that's my negative one. Is I certainly feel like the line. I this is a 41-39 game as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah,
which
I'm with you
is
there.
nauseating and terrifying because both teams kind of need it in a weird way. Like, and I mean, even Monday night's awesome San Francisco Baltimore matchup was like juicy, but it was like, oh no, the loser of this is still going to be the one seed like
Right,
in their
right,
respective conference. Like,
right.
we haven't had like a winner. Obviously, it's not the playoffs yet, but so if Dallas loses this, they're just about out of the NFC East conversation. I don't know if they have to win out and get one Philly
Hmm.
loss. And
Right,
if they win this game and get that Philly loss, they would not only clinch the division, but they would be the 2 seed. Whereas the
right.
Lions need to win out, obviously, to be the 2 seed or pick up an Eagles loss. So we're both obviously rooting for that. We've mentioned San Francisco and Philly. Where do you put the Cowboys with regards to the NFC playoff picture? Because this is a potential divisional
Yeah,
round matchup. Certainly not a wild
sure.
card option. But I mean, are you more afraid of them than the Eagles at this point? Less afraid? They're number 3 on that list for you. Like, where do you put them?
No, I think I have them too. It's 49ers and Cowboys are my two biggest fears. And honestly, the Rams are creeping up in a hurry as well. And some of that might just be, scars with Matthew Stafford and all that sort of stuff. But no, I think the Cowboys are in general a very well-rounded team with superstars on both sides of the ball. And so, like I said, I think it's a particularly tough matchup when it comes to the Cowboys passing offense against the Lions pass defense. And so that's when I'm looking at teams that might match up poorly for the Lions, it's teams with explosive passing offenses. So that's why, yeah, the 49ers, the Cowboys, and then the Rams. Like those are
Mhm.
teams that can really throw the ball right now. And the Eagles are typically in that conversation, but they're not playing particularly good football right now. And so, they're probably that tier right below that. And then everyone else is below that. So yeah, I think the Cowboys are right there in the first tier of teams that I don't want to be seeing early in the playoff run.
Yeah, I think we're all equally afraid of San Francisco, but we are particularly scarred by them just because of the way the last 2 years
Sure.
have gone.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to be like we're allowed to feel more afraid than you are, but I am a big Rams fan just because it. I mean, if things were to go chalk, the Cowboys really need one of these lower wild cards to pull off an upset in the wild
Yeah.
card round to not send them to San Francisco immediately.
Right.
I respect the Lions, but I would much rather go to Detroit than
Sure.
San Francisco for obvious reasons. I'm with you. That's kind of the ranking of thing. I would feel bad for the Lions if, like, after all this time, they finally get a home playoff game, they win the NFC North, and it's like, oh, now you have to deal with the like Matthew Stafford narrative in the playoffs. That like, I guess this has nothing to do with this game, but like, is that bothersome to you, or is it cool? Like, what are your thoughts on that potential? Because everyone kind of wants to see it.
Yeah.
As you know, like I zig when everybody zags on stuff like this.
Right. I've been mentally preparing for it for about a month because it's looked like that's where this thing is headed for that long. Um, and it's not going to be easy. I would not particularly look forward to that, even though as a writer, like there's just a million different storylines you could write about that. I mean, it's not even just about Matthew Stafford playing in Detroit for the first time, but it's also obviously Jared Goff getting back at his former team, and he's played the
I
Rams as a Lion
I didn't even
before.
think about that. Like, honestly,
Right.
like on the surface, it was only Matthew Stafford. That
Yeah.
was the only thing I was thinking about. Wow.
And the Lions have played the Rams since, and so Goff has gone against Sean McVay's, and all that sort of stuff. But in the playoffs, it's obviously much different because that's why they got rid of Goff. Is he was fine during the regular season, he couldn't take it against some of the bigger teams. So, yeah, I mean, it'd be a great storyline. It'd be a lot of fun during the time. But yeah, I think you laid it out there. Losing to Matthew Stafford in the playoffs would kind of take the sails out of the wind a little bit. I'm still kind of the belief that this Lion season has already been a success, and I don't want to judge the entire season based on a single game in the playoffs. I know, like,
That's well said.
that's where the bar is getting raised to next year and beyond, but we're talking single elimination playoffs, man. It's just sometimes the better team doesn't win, and you can't you can't like say, well, this is a failure. We got to start looking at different answers for this team. If that's what ends up happening, especially, I mean, this Rams team is looking kind of legit, and so maybe they're better than whatever seed that they get. Maybe they're better than a 6th seed. They're certainly going to be better than the NFC North win or NFC South winner. So there's not, to me, there won't be a ton of shame if that happens. It's gonna look bad.
I think that's really good perspective. A question I fielded a lot before the season began was, if the Cowboys don't reach the NFC Championship game, do you fire Mike McCarthy? And my response was always like, well, how don't they reach it? Like, do they miss it because like, they have like 12 losses? Do they miss it because they lose in the divisional round? Do they lose in the divisional round like off? Do they get blown out? Like, do they lose on a last second field goal? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's so much necessary context. And even then, like, even if they just lost conventionally in the divisional round, like, oh no, I mean, it would suck, but like, they've lost in the divisional round 3 years in a row. Like, there are a lot of fan bases, I would presume the Lions prior to 2023, that would have gladly traded lives with something like that.
100%. Really quick, I just want to say, I was talking to Arif Hassan last week, and I think he put it so perfectly. Is like, we've reached a place of where there are new types of ulcers. Like, now everything, like, the stakes are higher, the expectations are higher, and yeah, it's gonna suck when the Lions eventually lose this year in the playoffs. But I will take these kind of ulcers over the kind where, there's a 30-year 30-year division drought. There's a 32-year playoff win drought. So yeah, I think that perspective is always important to have, especially for a Lions fan that's kind of new to all this.
I don't think it's been said enough that playoff win, the last one, was against the Cowboys. Like, that's funny,
it sure was.
Given that this is the matchup in question. Speaking of catalytic moments, was the catalyst for the dynasty. That was one of the nights. So thank you very much. And
No
to celebrate that, I don't know. I really don't know if you knew this. The Cowboys are putting Jimmy Johnson in the Ring of Honor on Saturday night. So good luck winning that game, because like they've been, this has been overdue for almost as long as the entire Lions playoff drought right now.
The funny thing about this is, yesterday Dan Campbell, like, he's like, we got to win this one for Jimmy. I'm like, wait, what? that's not you. Like, I think that's what they're supposed to be saying, but like, he loves Jimmy Johnson so much, respects that man. Like, he went on a 3-minute rant about how much he respects that man, and how much he literally wants the team to perform in front of him as sort of like a tribute to him in some sort of interesting way. So maybe that gives the Lions a little extra oomph. I'm not really one to believe in things like that necessarily, but it is interesting that Dan is using that as a motivational tactic, at least for himself.
Dan is an interesting person. I'll just leave it at that. I've said my piece on Dan Campbell. I greatly respect him, but again, I really don't have as much of a problem with Dan as much as I do with the like general like reaction to Dan Campbell. That's what upsets me more. But a topic for a different day. Two last ones for you. You touched on Jared Goff, who has a playoff win over the Dallas Cowboys in one of those, like, ulcers you appreciate kind of game. That being said, he's always been kind of weirdly intrinsically aligned with Dak Prescott, what with going number 1 overall in that 2016 draft. And games against the Cowboys that he's had have been weirdly awesome for him. Now they've also swung the other way. But where is Jared Goff on your power rankings of Lions, players, like whether it's confidence, belief, trust? I mean, I can't imagine he's number one. Like, I would put Dak number 1 for the Cowboys right now. But even if Goff's not number 1, that's not a failure or an indictment. But like, where does he rank in the hierarchy of Lions players on the roster right now?
Yeah, I mean, he's probably like 5-ish. If I had to throw out some names, like Penei Sewell to me is probably the team's best player. Frank Ragnow's not far behind. Amon-Ra is not far behind that. And I don't know, you could maybe throw Aiden into that conversation as well.
Sure.
I mean, Goff struggles with inconsistency at times, but I do believe he is a much better player than he was with the Rams. And it's not just about having a really, really good offensive line, although that certainly helps. It's not just about having a bunch of weapons and a good running game, but they have made him a more intelligent quarterback before the snap. I was just talking about this on Twitter this morning. It was a storyline in Los Angeles that Sean McVay was running the show, running the offense. He'd be in his ear until the radio went off. And that made it so Jared Goff never really learned pre-snap reads and protection slides and all that sort of stuff. And the minute that Goff landed in Detroit, they're like, we are going to work on this for you. And I think it's really shown up, particularly in the past 2 weeks against a Denver and a Minnesota defense that thrives on chaos and just confusing quarterbacks. And Goff had 2 of his best games of the season against those defenses. And so I'm starting to gain more trust in him, but sometimes it feels like you're like, you get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm fine with the Lions eventually giving this guy, a 3 or 4 year extension until maybe the end of his career. And then he takes one like huge step back and fumbles the ball 3 times in one game. And you're like, nope, I'm not ready. I'm still not ready. And so that's kind of been the story, I would say, of the past 2 years, because the first year was kind of a disaster, but the team was really, really bad. Now that they've built a roster around him, it's like, increasing, and then like one big step back, and then increasing, one step back. And so I'm still like mostly confident in him, and I think he's in general a little bit underrated from a national perspective. But we're still, if we're talking like a QB ranking system, like he's probably top 12. I wouldn't put him necessarily top 5, top 7, top 8. He's in that like 9 to 12 range for me.
Yeah, I do think like his ceiling on a hot day is like that kind of 5 to 7 range though. Like you kind of bump him up
Yeah,
like a mid tier or
sure.
something. When he's cooking, he's definitely on. I think that's really fascinating. It's so strange. I can't really think. The only one I can think of like kind of comp to like the second quarterback that was a part of a big trade, like playing really well, was Kyle Orton when he got dealt to Denver in the Jay Cutler trade.
Sure.
So Jared Goff and Amon-Ra are sort of the Kyle Orton and was it Eddie Royal,
Oh,
of the modern day Lions. So I didn't think I'd
that
pull
does
that one
not
here
seem like
today.
a compliment.
It was Eddie Royal led the league in receiving once upon a time. So I mean that's
Okay.
this high praise, and that's the non Jay Cutler part of that trade. So I think you should be happy about that.
True.
So last one for you. I'd like to ask this because I think it's interesting. And you mentioned already a lot of Lions players. Who is a Lions player that should the Lions win on Saturday night, we're going to be sitting here as Cowboys fans like, man, didn't see that coming. Like, Amon-Ra St. Brown's low hanging fruit, Aiden Hutchinson's low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Like, who is a player that is lurking, that is playing well, that maybe doesn't get a lot of national love or doesn't have a big time story and is just kind of flying low, but could have a big impact?
Yeah, I guess my answer would probably be Ifatu Melifonwu, the Lions' 3rd-year safety.
The hero.
He just, yeah, he clinched the NFC North for the Lions last week, but he's only been a starter for the last 2 weeks. They've been looking to kind of get him into the starting lineup for a while, but he'd been battling injuries. He's kind of just been all over the place making plays. He has 3 sacks in the last 2 games. Obviously, he has that game-sealing pick. I think he has a forced fumble as well. He's a guy that I feel like transforms their secondary a little bit and gives them a little bit more star power and disruption abilities. They really like to use him on the blitz. I think he's blitzed like 8 or 9 or 10 times over the past 2 weeks, and not afraid to get his nose dirty in the run game, and then has some ball skills as he showed last week. So a guy that's just kind of starting to trend up. The interesting part about it is like, he could be a starter this week, or he could be a guy that comes off the bench, and that's all dependent on CJ Gardner-Johnson, which we don't really have one feeling one way or the other. But I think having the couple games that Ifatu Melifonwu has had, is I think they might decide to just take another week. CJ, get in more football shape, and then we'll see in the finale there. That could very well be what they do, and maybe they want to get CJ Gardner-Johnson's feet wet as much as possible before the playoffs start. So it's kind of an interesting scenario where he might not play much at all, but he could also be one of the biggest factors in the football game. So that's definitely one day, I guess, keep your eye on Saturday night.
Very good answer. Very cool to see where the Lions are at, Jeremy. Happy for you and the Predator Detroit team. This week, I asked Brandon Gowton who he was rooting for and who he would structure his rooting guide at Bleeding Green Nation around, because obviously there's a vested interest in both sides of this game.
Sure.
He was like, well, it's a win-win either way, but I'm rooting for the Cowboys. Like the Lions are that big of a threat. Consider that to where an Eagles fan is rooting for the Cowboys because it's all about securing the highest possible seat. Look at that.
That sounds like a headline. Eagles fans rooting for Cowboys because they're so scared of the Lions.
You know what? I'd like to think that I'm good at my job, but Jeremy is much better at it. And if you are watching or listening to this and you enjoy things that we do, you actually have Jeremy to thank. One of our very popular things around here, Jeremy, is our weekly Madden simulation. And I'll fess up right now. We completely stole that from Pride of Detroit. They were doing it first, so they inspired us.
You know what? I'm sharing with the family, right? What's good for the family is good for you is good for the family.
That's true. Jeremy's being very kind because I annoyed him a lot with a lot of questions about how he did things. So very humble. Last one, which is super important. I recently
Hmm.
watched Oppenheimer. I don't know if anyone's heard of this. Pretty good movie. I hadn't seen it. So it was awesome.
Hmm.
What's a movie, a TV show, something? A lot of people are on a holiday break.
Yeah,
Not us. We grind all the time. But
yeah.
if someone's got some downtime, what do you recommend them watching?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I'm kind
Thank
of a
you.
TV
I am
buff.
good at this job.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. I mean, if you haven't seen any of the seasons of Fargo, the TV show, it's fantastic, and they just have a new season right now with John Hamm, who is one of my favorite actors, both as a drama and comedy actor.
mhm.
So, and I've also been on Mad Men, so that's a fun little fact about me that not a lot of
What?
people know. Yeah,
You got to explain that now. I mean, you can't just like say that and walk off.
why not? Oh no, I was an extra in one episode of Mad Men playing fans backstage at a Rolling Stones concert. So go look for my ginormous Jufro in the background of that episode.
Okay. I watched I think like the first two seasons of Mad Men, and then I tapped
Hmm.
out. But as I understand, the ending got a little interesting. So you've inspired me to maybe
Yeah,
relight that fire. You're right. John Hamm rules. Tag is a super underrated movie.
I
And
you know what, I saw some of that and I'm surprised that I agree with you.
yeah, I mean, he's really funny in general, but like I think that's kind of the movie I first think of when I think of him in that kind of
He was
sense. So
great in Bridesmaids as well, right? That was
yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't have thought about that immediately, but he was
yeah,
in it. It's hard to think of a movie that he's been in, except for Top Gun. He's just super
true,
serious. I don't know if
right.
it was general. I don't know. I don't remember what rank in the military he was. The roar has been restored. Jeremy is on Twitter at Detroit on Lion.
Nailed it.
Very difficult to say when you say on Twitter and then Detroit on Lion, but nevertheless, that's where you can find him. Jeremy, be well. You're the
You
best.
too, buddy.